This Compass presentation, Israel's soon-to-be-discovered gold and silver riches by Bill Perkins, was recorded live at a Stealing the Mind Bible conference. To view more Stealing titles, get information on our Holy Land trips and future Bible conferences, go to compass.org.
My name is Bill Perkins with Compass, and I have a presentation I'd like to make that I think is timely for what's going on in the world. And the name of it's Israel's soon-to-be-discovered gold and riches, and how these gold and silver riches are tied to the red heifer that they're also trying to put together in Israel. So it's a fascinating study, and it starts with Ezekiel 38 and 39. First thing you need to know, most people that are Bible-oriented know about Ezekiel 38 and 39, but when does the invasion take place? The Bible's very specific on a day that this invasion takes place. So if you look at this timeline, this is just the 7,000-year timeline that we've taught for many, many years. And what we're dealing with right here is the 7-year tribulation. So, tribulation, 7 years, is interesting in that it is 2 billion people die very quickly right after rapture. Another 2 billion die before the midpoint of the tribulation. And then another 2 billion die, and then by the end of it, it says few are left in Isaiah 24. And they're dying after rapture from two main sources, is war and drugs, or it's pharmakia, probably vaccines, as we're starting to see today. If they continue to escalate in death, that's going to be part of what's going on in the first part of the tribulation. Now, since this is talking about the Jews and what's invasion, we need to kind of understand the big picture of the Jews. And this is a picture of the 7-year tribulation as looking at it from a Jewish perspective, where they are and what they're doing. And as you can see, right after rapture, the Jews are in Israel, and they're protected. They're protected by a New World Order peace treaty, and it's 7 years long. And halfway through the peace treaty, the treaty's broken, and then the Jews flee and hide in Basra, Jordan, which we believe is Petra. So that's the Jews. And then at the end of that 7-year period is the second coming, and he comes to the Jewish people, and it says they see the hands and the feet that they pierced, and it's quite the situation at the end of the 7-year period. There's the verse, Ezekiel 38:11b, that talks about that they're living securely in the first half of the tribulation. Now, what's interesting is the whole world's going to pot. It's going to Hades in a handbasket, and Israel is living securely. And they have food, and they have water, and they have energy. They have all these things. It's amazing, and the rest of the world's falling apart and dying. So, there's a worldwide earthquake. We talked about a specific event that happens in the first part of the tribulation. And in Ezekiel 38 and 39, there's this two earthquakes, basically. And we need to know which one it is. But the earthquake talks about it in Ezekiel 38:19. It says, "In my zeal and my blazing wrath, I declare that on that day there will surely be a great earthquake in the land of Israel." It says, "The fish of the sea, the birds of the heaven, the beasts of the field, all the creeping things that creep on the earth, and all the men who are on the face of the earth shall shake." All the men who are on the face of the earth. This is a worldwide earthquake. The mountains will also be thrown down. The steep pathways will collapse, and every wall will fall to the ground. That's a big earthquake, and that's in the tribulation, and that happens right during the Ezekiel 38 and 39 invasion. So we know it can't be the second earthquake. There's two earthquakes in the tribulation. One is when the mountains are moved, which we just read about. And then the one at the end of the tribulation is when the mountains fall And the whole earth is back down to pretty much its original state from the time of Adam and Eve. And you can see the verses there. But we're talking about the first one. So at that earthquake, and it's at the Revelation 6:12. It's basically at the sixth seal of the first seven seals of the tribulation. And the second earthquake is at the seventh bowl at the end. So they're far apart. So it's easy to determine that the Ezekiel 38 and 39 invasion happens at this time because it says that's when it happens. These are the nations, and this is Andy Wood's chart that he made, and it's very good. It's the nations that are involved in this invasion. They're coming down from all parts. The main ones are, of course, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Magog is, Andy has defined as basically coming from China and other nations that are in the Middle East. And then, of course, Libya and Sudan, but not Egypt and not Jordan. Now, why would these nations band together and attack Israel? What in the world is going on? Well, Ezekiel 38:13 says, have you, talking about Russia, come to capture spoil? Have you assembled your company to seize plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, and to capture great spoil? Now, these are the nations of the world that have just watched this invasion starting to take place, and they say, what's going on? Have you come for the silver and the gold? A lot of people thought, they're going to invade to get the oil. Well, Israel doesn't have oil right now. But it doesn't say oil. It says silver and gold. So, silver and gold is there, and also mentions cattle, which is the word for livestock. And I do think that that's interesting because with all the vaccination going on that's changing DNA and all, they're going to have the only, because of their sacrifices have to be pure, they're not going to take any of the DNA vaccines that change the genome of their sacrifices, because that would be an affront to God. And so they're going to have a pure race of cattle that the world's going to be envious of, and Russia wants to come get them. And they're going to be doing sacrifices during the first half of the tribulation. They're going to rebuild their temples, go back to sacrifices. So they'll have to do somewhere around 100 to 200,000 cattle sacrificed every year. So they've got a lot of cattle, and Russia's coming not only to get the silver and the gold, but also the livestock. So they can take that back, and they'll have a pure breed that they can redo at home that's not messed up. So you can sort of see where the vaccines are going from that. So now, back in the day, backing up to Solomon, God says, what do you want? And he says, I would like to have an understanding heart. Lord, that's what I want. And God was really pleased with that. He said, wow, okay, you want an understanding heart. I'm going to give you, because you've asked for that and not asked for a long life or riches or anything else, I'm going to give you that understanding heart. But I'm also going to, because you've not asked, I'm also going to give you riches. Now, when God says, I'm going to bless you with riches, that's an interesting thing. God's blessing one man, he says, I'm going to give you great riches. That could be interesting to see how much God thinks is great riches. Well, how rich was Solomon? He was quite rich. Solomon had a fleet of ships. Now, remember, looking back, we know he was the richest guy in the world, so it's not surprising, but he had a great fleet of ships, and on one trip to Ophir, it brought in from the trip, from going out and coming back, 420 talents of gold. 1 Kings 10:1. Well, how much is that? 420 talents of gold. Well, it's kind of interesting because if you start doing the math, you got 1 talent is 75 pounds. Now, a lot of people think it's 100 pounds. I'm going to use 75 pounds for calculations, and you've got 75 pounds times 16 ounces, so that's 1,200 ounces for each talent. And if you multiply 1,200 ounces times the price of gold today, it just hit $3,000 on Friday, is $3,600,000. $3,600,000. Wow, that's per talent. And if you multiply times the 420 that the ships brought back, they brought back 1,512 million or whatever, but basically $1.5 billion. This is income coming back to Solomon's deal, to Israel. He's the king. 1.5 billion, and that's just one journey, and he ruled for 40 years. So now, also, people brought him stuff. Queen of Sheba, the famous thing in the in 1 Kings also, it talks about what she did. She brought him 120 talents of gold. And if you go through the math and you multiply the same formula, and you end up getting, she brought him $432 million in gold. Wow. She just came to see him and brought him as a gift. I mean, Musk doesn't operate like that, today. That's a lot of money. And $432 million from that one visitor. He had visitors coming from all over the world. He's the richest guy in the world, the most influential guy in the world, and they all brought gifts. That's what they did when you came. Just like the kings from the three kings from the Orient for Jesus, they brought gifts, bearing gifts. And that was the culture of the day. So 432 million. Plus, it says in the Bible that there are lots of precious stones and spices and this kind of stuff. So this was coming into Solomon. So there was another, every 3 years, the ships of Tarshish came, bringing gold and silver and ivory and other things and peacocks. But basically what you end up with is the King Solomon made silver nothing. If you had a sterling silver bowl, it was nothing. It was like a clay pot. It was so common in Israel. And he had all of this drinking cup. Everything he had was all gold. In fact, silver was just nothing silver. It's no big deal. It's not considered valuable in the days of Solomon. That's how much gold there was and silver. So, Solomon was the king, of course, who inherited the task of building the first temple. And they had the ark that ran around all over the place, and God wouldn't let David build a temple because he was had murdered guys and he didn't work good. But his son, Solomon, was given the task of building the temple. And so he took the ark and he multiplied it by 10. So if it was, I don't remember the exact dimensions, but if it was, if the ark was 15 feet high, then he made it 150 feet high. If it was 20 feet long, you made it 200 feet long, that kind of thing. So he did it times 10. And so on the inside, instead of one menorah, he added 10 more. He had all the gold he needed, coming in every week. And you can look in this picture and see that. And this is a picture of the inside. And in fact, this is how you can tell the difference if it's the first temple versus the second temple. When they came back from Babylon and rebuilt the temple the second time, they only had one menorah in there. But in Solomon's day, here's what it looked like. He had 11. And he also had 11 tables of showbread. So this is all about 1,000 years before Christ. And the contents, of course, plus 10. Now, those menorahs, if you do how much they're worth, each one was $360 billion. I'm not making this up. This is right out of the Bible. The weight of the menorah is solid gold, and it was, real high. You can see that it's supposed to be 6 feet high, according to the Jewish sages that study the Bible and all today. But $360 billion per menorah, and he's got 11 of them. That's a lot of cash that's worth. And he had also solid gold tables of showbread, $60 billion each. So now you're talking $600-700 billion worth of tables of showbread. Now these are some fascinating. This, by the way, is from the Temple Institute drawing. Here's a close-up of the menorahs, just so you can count them. But there's 11 there, and tables of showbread. They weren't as thick as that, but the tables of showbread. The purpose of that was they had to prepare the bread every day, and there were 12 loaves that they did, and then they ate them, and they ended up doing 11 of those things every day. That's a lot of baking. So I guess a baker was a busy guy in those days. But there were 11 tables of showbread. Solid gold. $60 billion each. This is amazing for the weight of this. And all this is, you can multiply it out and come up with those numbers. Now, so we all know, and I'm having to kind of go through this. This is just sort of getting you to a point of that you'll make more sense in a minute. But Israel, at some point in time, I've forgotten the date, but they divide. You got the 10 northern tribes and the 2 southern tribes. And so Assyria comes in and conquers the 10 tribes in Israel, the northern 10 tribes. They had split. They got that. They almost got the 2 southern tribes, but God stopped them, and they left them for another 112 years or something like that. And so then you fast forward to Babylon later, and they come and they conquer the 2 southern tribes. Now, in between there, with 112 years, you got to think, what in the world are they going to do with all of these? Let's just take the menorahs themselves, or the tables of showbread, or all that gold that's coming in. And we're going to see how much it was in just a minute. But Jeremiah says, "Gosh, we got conquered. The 10 northern tribes are conquered. Somebody's going to try to come after us." And so he hides it. Before Babylon conquers them, he hides the gold and the silver. Well, that's fascinating. That was a lot of it. And in 2 Maccabees, which is not a part of the Old Testament, but is quoted, Jesus actually quoted from it, I believe. And he said that Jeremiah found a cave to store the treasure, including the Ark of the Covenant. You've heard of the Ark of the Covenant. And covered up the entrance, saying that the treasure would not be found. He prophesied that it wouldn't be found until God gathers his people together and shows his mercy. So that he said, Babylon basically in the future, when they do get conquered, they won't find it, and they're not going to find it until the end of the last days. That's fascinating. Well, what they did was they put stuff out in the temple to be captured, so that when Babylon came to try to capture everything, capture Israel or whatever, and take them back, you remember the story, they put stuff out to be captured. They're like, "Oh, you got our golden menorah, you got our table of showbread, you got we're brokenhearted." And it was a lot of stuff. King Nebuchadnezzar took it all back to Babylon, and then you remember the famous story of the handwriting on the wall, that when they were drinking out of the gold cups and having a good party, God wasn't impressed, and he said, basically, "You're in deep doo-doo." And so ultimately it flips Nebuchadnezzar out, and he sends all the gold and silver and pots and pans and things that they had captured back. He doesn't want anything to do with any of it. And he made a list of it and sent it back to make sure that they couldn't say one thing against him. And it says in Ezra 6, it said, "Also let the gold and silver utensils of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and brought them to Babylon, to be returned and brought to their places in the temple in Jerusalem, and you shall put them in your house of God." So he gave it all back. Well, the list was a pittance of what they actually had. And even in the list, you can see here, he lays it out: 30 gold dishes, 1,000 silver dishes, 30 gold bowls, 410 silver bowls, and 1,000 other articles. 5,400 articles, and he listed every one of them and gave them all back. That was a lot, and he thought it was all, and they're taking it back. But was it 5,400? Let's think about this. Where are the other 11 menorahs? Where are the other other 10 menorahs? Where are the other 10 tables of showbread? Where's all the rest of the stuff that Solomon was taking in? Well, it was not mentioned. Jeremiah had hidden it. When we go to Rome, there's an arch there. And what Rome did when they would win a big victory is they would build an arch and have a victory parade through the arch. Well, Rome was the one who conquered Israel right after Jesus was crucified. In 70 AD, they were conquered. And they came back from conquering Israel and built this arch. And it's called Titus Arch, and he was the general of the army that went to Israel and conquered Israel. It was a terrible, terrible thing. A lot of people died, or most people died of starvation, all this stuff. And they came back. This is his arch that they built. And on the inside of the arch, it even shows the stuff that they captured in Israel. They got the menorah, one menorah, and they got the tables of showbread. You can see the silver flutes and all trumpets that they have, and those are Jewish people, the people that have studied this art. It's in stone in Rome, who've studied this. These are Jewish slaves, and they brought back Jews to be slaves, and they also brought back the Jews to be architects. And you know what they did with all that money that they got? They had so much gold and silver that they brought back. They built the Colosseum. There's a little bitty plaque in the Colosseum that says, and it's hard to find because they move it around, but when we go there, we always try to find it. And it says that this was built from the spoils of the Roman conquering Israel back in, it was 70 AD. So you got that. Fast forward to 1947. They started finding in Israel. Israel was almost ready to come back in 48, and they started finding the Dead Sea Scrolls. Thank you, Susie. I've got my wife sitting here. You reach a certain age, and you have to have two of you to remember everything. I know nobody else has that problem, but anyway. So fast forward to 1947, and the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And there's a whole story about that. You can look. But interesting, they're all little fragments of parchments. They're all on animal skins and all, except one. One that they found was not an animal skin. It was a copper scroll. And in the copper scroll, somebody, and they figured that 5 different people wrote the copper scroll, they hammered out this fascinating list of the true treasures from Solomon, and even said that they gave some clues as to where it was buried, and they put in, anyway, it's fascinating. It's hammered as opposed to written, so it stood the test of time. Well, several hundred years ago, the Hebrew scholars tried to locate these other records and that Jeremiah talked about, and what they found looking for was in this thing called and I don't know how you pronounce this. I'm going to call it Imi Hamelka. We'll go with that. And this was, we'll call it Imi. Imi was a Hebrew account of 5 people who hid the ark, the sanctuary, the treasures of Solomon's temple, and they're most likely the 5 guys, of course, that hammered out the copper scroll. And then in 1648, a rabbi translated this Imi Hamelki account, and his translations were discovered in 1992. So here's what they found. And this is fascinating. He's got, I think there's a total of 16 caves that it's listed. And I've taken what he translated, and I just want you to look at it and see the amounts of what was in this, what they buried. So it's called the Mishnah 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the first one talks about the ark and the golden crown of Aaron, basically, and the holy menorah, the breastplate of judgment, the silver trumpets, the cherubim, the altar of burnt offerings, the table of showbread. All these things are there, and the list continues with the several pages of priestly garments that they buried. Then the second part of it, holy vessels of the temple that were in Jerusalem and in every place. They're inscribed by this and that. And it goes down to the vessels of the Holy of Holies. And one of the things in there is the ashes of the red heifer, which will make sense in just a second. And then Mishnah 3, it says, these are the vessels of the temple that were buried in the ground. It talks about the locking pins, the pegs, the bores, the rings, and all that's from the original ark that they were 40 years walking around the desert on. Now it starts listing fascinating things. It says 1,200,000 silver mazzarkrats. And I don't know, I probably messed that word up, but they're sacrificial basins. These are 1,200,000 of them. And they're silver. And then 50,000 fine gold mazzarkrats, they're sacrificial basins. 50,000. 50,000. 1.2 million bowls of silver. Wow, that's a lot of things to bury. It gets better. 500,000 trays of fine gold. You get to 500,000 gold trays. 1.2 million trays of silver. 500,000 bread mold of fine gold. 1.2 million bread molds of silver. And each of the molds, there were 5 margalat pearls and 2 precious stones, and the value of each of the precious stones was 100 talents of gold. Well, a talent of gold was 360 million, if you do the math. Wow, 100 talents of them. So it was 3.2 million per talent times the 100, and it came to the 360. So the 200,000 talents of gold was 720 billion. This is $1 billion. $720 billion that they buried in today's prices somewhere in Israel. 7-branch menorah, 360 billion. And we're assuming, of course, that gold's at 3,000 again, silver at $30. So 77 tables of gold, don't know how much that's worth, but they're solid gold. 7,000 talents of gold, that's $25 billion. Priceless stones, 7 cubics by 5 cubics. These things are huge. 1 million talents of silver. That's $36 billion worth. And then all this is buried. Jeremiah didn't want the Babylonians to capture it. He threw out a little bit to say, oh, don't take it, it's like a ruse. And 100,000 talents of gold. $360 billion. Now we're starting to really get into some money. 600,000 talents of fine gold. That's $2.16 trillion. We're starting to get up there now. 7 golden curtains, $43 billion, because it tells you how many, 12,000 talents. And you got the Levitical garments and the 70,000 bells and turbans and pants. I mean, Israel was this was their zenith. This was their heyday. And Jeremiah hit all this. And it says that in this account, all of these service clothes were concealed until the future to atone for Israel in the last days. Fascinating. Here we're not through. 1,000 copper lyres overlaid with fine gold, and 8 stones. 7,000 harps. That's going to be quite the sound one day. All these were hidden and consecrated, and the fittest men of Israel, only a few people knew where they were, basically. And they hid them until the day that when Israel would return to their former statue and reclaim the eternal honor and worldly glory. Because Israel's going to go back to being a big dog one day. And they're writing it in these things. Now we're going to, one of my favorite items, here's 1,200,000 talents of silver, $43 billion. I'm going to just say that again, 1,200,000 talents of silver. And they're 75 pounds each. 1,600,000 of fine silver. 2 million pots of copper, fine copper. 1,100,000 pots of iron. Now this was all dealt with the priest. One of the 10 tribes was a priestly group that did all the stuff. And remember, it's a theocracy. It wasn't a democracy. And so it was all part of the government. And this is what they watched over and did until Jeremiah buried it all. And my favorite of all the things that they buried was 3,000 frying pans, gold. 3,000 gold frying pans. I mean, if you didn't have a gold frying pan, I mean, you were second class, I guess. But he had 3,000. Solomon had 3,000 gold frying pans. Now, how many wives did he have? How many wives? I think it was 600. Is that right? So when he would make a proposal, he'd say, I want you to marry me, and I got 3,000 solid gold frying pans, don't you want to come? And she'd say, so I would get 3, because there's so many wives, you see. Okay. Whatever. Mishnah 11, it keeps going, and goes down to hundreds of thousands of gold shields for battle, silver shields, 350,000 precious stones, no telling what they're worth. They're probably diamonds. And then 1,900,000 corn of gold. And I could not find what that means. I don't even know what that is. Nobody knows that I could figure out. And then the prophets of the wise men and the scribes in the world could not calculate the wealth and the glory that was in Jerusalem. They were in their heyday. No king, prophet, or anyone else knew where they were hidden, except, and it names the guys that knew it, all Israel concealed the vessels until a righteous king arises over Israel. And they had a vow that they wouldn't reveal it. And so, then it says that at that time the great river will issue forth from the Holy of Holies in the temple. Its name is Gihon, and it will flow from the great and dreadful to the great and dreadful desert to become mixed with the Euphrates River. If you remember in the millennium, at the end of the tribulation, the water comes out of right at the Mount Moriah, which is now the highest mountain because all the other mountains are flattened. Water comes out and runs to the east and runs to the west and flows in. So the Dead Sea becomes a live sea, and the Mediterranean gets the other one, and it just changes the topography of everything from that big earthquake at the end that we were talking about. So in Zechariah 14:8, it says, in that day living waters will flow out of Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea and half toward the western sea, and it will be like summer as well as in the winter. So it's going to flow year-round. Now, this is fascinating because when we go to Israel, we can see this stuff. It's fascinating. Nebuchadnezzar, in 2 Kings 25, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, and he and his army against Jerusalem and camped against it and built a siege wall around it. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is capturing Israel. And the Babylonian capture is talking about it right here. And he surrounded Israel with a siege wall. Jerusalem with a siege wall. So he surrounded Jerusalem with a siege wall. Nobody can get out, nobody can get in, and they're starving to death. And on the 9th day of the 4th month of the famine was so severe in the city that no one had any food for the people in the land. That was it. They ran out of food. They couldn't do anything. And if they left, they got killed. And if they didn't, they were going to die of starvation. So, interestingly enough, all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate between the two walls besides the king's garden, though the Chaldeans were all around the city. And they went by the way of Arba, which is basically Jericho. It's the desert area down near the Dead Sea. Whoa. What this means is when King Zedekiah realized that the Babylonians were going to breach the walls of Jerusalem and take the city, he and his soldiers fled in the middle of the night through an underground passage. There's underground passages all over this area of Israel, and nobody knew about this. Why did they not know about this, I wonder? I wonder if that's where the treasures were buried and it was kept such a tight secret, people were starving to death. Because this passage what happened is they took the king and his army, went in and down to the passage. They pursued the king and overtook him on the plains of Jericho. They got all the way to Jericho underground. And what we found out is that there was a Roman soldier that was chasing a deer, or two Roman soldiers chasing a deer, and they chased him all the way down to near Jericho, and then saw all this army coming out of the ground. And they sent back and told the rest of them. They came down and captured them and killed them. It was amazing. So this is when we were in Israel one time. I took this picture. We're in what's called Solomon's Quarry, where they did stones, where they carved them out. And the way they took them out of this quarry, which was right next to the Temple Mount, they had quarried the stones, and then they moved them down the tunnel, and then raised them up with ropes and different things up to the Temple Mount, and built the walls of the Temple Mount, built the stones of the second temple. All of that was done through this. So this is one temple. Now, in this quarry is a door that goes to the passage that goes all the way to Jericho. And when the Ottomans took over this area back in I think it was the 1500s, they had this opening and they closed it up because people kept going down in this passage. It's 18 miles long. And they went down this passage and they would get lost. It has all kind of chutes and things in it and all, but if you didn't have enough light, if you light your torch and you go and you're looking at what's in this passage and you get lost, or your torch goes out or whatever, then you have nothing. You can't get out. And people were going in there and they never see them again. And then all these people just died once they got in the tunnel and couldn't get out. The Israeli army from that time got all the way down to Jericho and was coming out of the ground, and that's where they caught them. So there's this passage that's 18 miles long, and it's covered up at the Temple Mount, a passage that goes down to Qumran. I don't know exactly where it comes in and goes out, but the one in Qumran, the people that we work with feel like that they have an idea of where some of the Holy of Holies ashes were buried. Well, now that's interesting because it's important for Israel. I mean, it's one thing for them to say, oh, wow, we can get all this 100 trillion. If you add it all up, it's over $100 trillion. And that's enough for somebody to invade, to get. But the main thing for Israel is, that the treasures of the temple include the ashes of the red heifer. So you've heard probably on the news, they're trying to find these cows, red cows in Texas, and they've shipped them to Israel. And sure enough, they're fine, but they can't sacrifice the cow yet because the ashes have to be mixed with old ashes. The Moses' original ashes, each time they ran out of ashes, they would save some of the ashes and they would mix new ashes with the old ashes. So you had a continuous line of ashes, or a continuous, what do you want to call it, that touch back to Moses. So even if they tried to sacrifice a cow right now, they can't use the ashes until they find the ashes that are lost, buried. So these groups that go into Israel looking for, are really looking for the ashes of the red heifer, because it takes that for them to be sanctified. It doesn't matter if you're rich and you're going to hell. You know, they want, I mean, in their minds, they want to be rich and sanctified so that they go to heaven. That, in a Jewish perspective, looking at it that way. So, this is talking about a portion of the ashes were put away for future sanctification of Israel with the other treasures hidden by the prophet Jeremiah. But the ashes must be mixed with that. So, it's not Solomon's treasure that is so important to find. Rather, it's the original ashes of the female red cow, because they must be mixed with the new ashes. And when they find the original ashes, they find the rest of the silver and gold. It's all together. But they have to, they're going after the ashes, because it doesn't matter about, so they're not going to give you a permit for a treasure hunt, but to look for, they want to find the archaeological treasures that, like the ashes of the red heifer, so they can go back to sacrifices. They can't start sacrifices until they find the ashes of the red heifer. So, conclusion. Israel has over $100 trillion in gold and silver. We just saw that buried somewhere in Israel. It will be discovered. And Russia, Iran, Turkey, and those other countries are going to invade to capture it, but they're going to lose badly. In the middle of the tribulation, the treasure is going to be captured by the Antichrist at the midpoint of the tribulation. And the Bible talks about that at the end of the tribulation, when Jesus comes and rescues Israel, he's going to restore Israel's stolen treasures. So they're going to find them, and then they're going to come after them, Russia, but they don't get them. But then the Antichrist is going to get them at the middle of the tribulation, and at the end of the tribulation, they're going to get their treasures back. Excuse me. But finding the ashes of the red heifer is the most important thing that they can do over there. So the archaeological digs down there are hugely important for them. And we were going to go down and see one of these digs that these guys that we're following seem to have they've done a lot of study, and they got ground penetrating radar and all this, and they think they got a beat on it. And they were 2 days from starting their dig to find it, and October 7th happened. And they got, the Hamas started, killed all the people down near Gaza. And basically the whole nation of Israel had to stop doing what they were doing and had to call to arms, and they all had to go fight because they didn't know what more was coming and all. And it stopped the dig. It never got started. And it's just been in the last few days, literally, that they've started back. And we're going to go back and see that in about 3 weeks. So that, to me, was a fascinating story. And I just had to get it on tape, and we'll put this up on YouTube. But thank you for those that listen to it.
You've been watching Israel's Soon-to-Be-Discovered Gold and Silver Riches by Bill Perkins. To view more Stealing titles, get information on our Holy Land trips and future Bible conferences, go to compass.org.